Welcome back to the Pursuit Podcast. I'm your host, Jessica Rose. Today, we're going to be talking about hiring unexpected talent within technology, getting to work alongside folks on your projects or in your companies who maybe you didn't immediately expect to see there. I'm here today with
Dhawal Shah. I'm the founder of Class Central.
And just for our listeners who may not already be using Class Central, maybe for folks who aren't super into online learning, what is Class Central?
Class Central, you can consider it as a TripAdvisor for online education.
Ooh.
So what we do is we basically aggregate online courses from all over the world, and we have tens of thousands of user-generated reviews. For now, we focus mostly on free online courses taught by universities, which are also popularly known as MOOCs, massive open online courses. So some of the platforms you might have heard of is Coursera, edX, FutureLearn. Yeah, so we aggregate courses that are similar to these platforms, and then we categorize them into a taxonomy and help you search through it. The reviews help you decide if the course is right for you.
And this sounds like a really useful resource. Ballpark, how many people are working with you on this?
At this point, just this year, we sort of grew to 10.
Oh, wow.
But for most of the journey, it was like we just published our 8-year anniversary post. It was a side project that I started 8 years ago over a Thanksgiving weekend,
Yeah.
It was a GitHub project. I saw these courses which from Stanford. I knew that as soon as I saw these courses that I would at least be doing one course at a time. So all I wanted was to be able to sort these courses by start date.
Yeah.
So I just built a one-page site, put in a table plugin that allows you to sort. But it didn't sort by start date. It sorted by the string. So
Oh, no.
the sort didn't really work. Somebody on Hacker News found out.
And they were like, hey, let me help.
It was more friendly. It was more friendly in that era. So 8 years ago, yeah.
I was going to say, I was like, wait, you got meaningful help off of Hacker News? But maybe a kindler, gentler time.
Yeah. And 8 years ago, it was very early in my career too, right? So at that time, you're more excited about projects, new projects, side projects. And, so it was sort of an inspiration.
So yeah, you've got 10 folks now, and we're talking about non-traditional talent because when we were talking about having you come on this podcast, you mentioned something to me that sounded really interesting. You said that most of the folks who join you to come and work on this are folks who have had backgrounds that kind of overlap with use of your website.
Yeah, generally we want people with sort of problems, not the solution.
Oh.
Because I think the online education problem is it's so different, and it varies from individual to country, geographic regions, that there's probably more access that we don't even understand. And it sort of follows my own journey too. I built it for myself. And then over the journey of it, I discovered another set of skills that I really wasn't trained for. One of the other things we do is we write a lot about online education. That is something I have never done before. I barely had a blog post or barely written anything. And being a computer science student, so I never actually even published a paper. But then the success of Class Central, for a big chunk of time when it was just mostly me and maybe one or two volunteers, we didn't really develop the product. We just wrote articles.
Yeah.
And that was a big reason for the success. We are still alive today. We are 10 people. It's because we were able to write articles, and we have over 800 articles. You realize that, yes, I started as a computer science student, but the reason it's successful is because I could write. And it's probably a skill that I didn't even know I had. And I feel like there are other people there who might have adjacent skills to the one they are trained in or they want to do. So what I generally look for is, are they interested in the online education space? And maybe even whether they have a different perspective than I have or the rest of the team has.
I want to dive into this a little bit more deeply because you're not just talking about a really interesting way to hire. You're talking about qualities that I often see in really successful and, to be a bit weird and biased, really interesting founders. So you founded this as a side project, and coming into it, you said, wow, the needs of this project require me to either learn to write or learn to find people who can write, or both. So I'm really interested in this sort of adaptive learning process on your side. I think writing's just an example. We could just as easily be talking about managing people or finance or business planning, I think. But since you mentioned writing, can you talk to us a little bit about sort of what that journey felt like? So you woke up one day and realized, oh no, or oh yay, I have to put an article on the site? What was the process like?
I was very lucky that I got success from writing very early on. And I remember I was one of the first persons to found out that Coursera was a for-profit company. I found a job post from them, and then I just copy pasted the contents of the job post. And at that time, Google Plus was a thing.
Yeah. Oh, wow. 8 years, huh?
Yeah. So I posted it in Google Plus, and then I posted that link on Hacker News, and it went to the front page of Hacker News. And this was just January 2012. Before we all knew like MOOCs were going to be a thing. They were not even called MOOCs back then.
Yeah.
And then I had a couple of other successes similar. So I felt like it's not really writing itself. It's more about the news angle. So it's more industry analysis.
It sounds very much like journalism.
It's on the spectrum of journalism. So we generally do find out earlier than others that if a policy change happens at a Udacity or Coursera, because we have reviews, we have hundreds of thousands of students, that overlap with their audience. So they end up complaining in their reviews. So we generally do find out things earlier than others. So using that as like constantly producing, it helps us keep momentum in terms of maintaining the frequency of posts without trying to come up with ideas. There's always something you can write about these platforms.
So it sounds like if I was going to extrapolate some of your experience into maybe advice for somebody out there working on their side project or looking to found something. Yeah, I think we've got a lot of very interesting gems in what you've just talked about. So you talked about the need to move outside your immediate skill set and the potential incredible success you can find there. But also, it sounds very much like we're talking about the value of a community around what you build.
Yeah, I mean, it's not as powerful as the community you have built.
I would politely argue.
But this sort of strategy came up organically rather than me trying to find, because people occasionally mail and, hey, I want to help you out. And some of them are still with me, or some of them started out and ended up doing other jobs in the education space. And I wouldn't be here without that kind of support. And not all of them had traditional backgrounds, or even degrees, or even skills in some cases.
Yeah, what we really wanted to talk about today was these sort of unexpected talent, these folks who've come into your program and come along to work with you who you might not have expected. Can you talk to me about maybe what your first hire was like?
Yeah, like I would talk like this person who's still with me right now, and like he used to work at a library.
Oh, wow.
He only graduated high school, and at one point he worked as a bartender, and during the day he worked as a librarian, and in the evening he worked as a bartender to basically buy a house. As someone who doesn't have any sort of traditional education but had done over 100 online courses.
Oh, wow. That sounds like a fantastic fit. I was already biased when you told me he worked in a library, but clearly this guy's great.
But he hasn't still read Harry Potter, so...
I mean, me neither. It's yeah.
Oh, wow.
Oh, is that weird?
Just kidding.
We've been busy.
You're from UK.
Oh, I'm American. I just have lived here for a while.
Ah, all right.
I don't think they make the Britishers read it either. I think it's still gently optional. This got very judgy very fast. Like,
No.
wow, we can't keep doing an interview if you haven't read Harry Potter.
Anyways, back to the... so like, it's always difficult to figure out how to contribute.
Yeah.
And one of the first things sort of he contributed was writing like a review for a course he did. And,
Yeah.
and eventually now he manages sort of our catalog and taxonomy. So some of us who actually went through the education system can be very narrow, but someone who hasn't and just explored, like they understand or can understand difference between sociology or psychology and humanities. And, I can organize computer science courses, but beyond that, it's like everything is humanities or business.
Yeah.
But going deeper into that, so now he's like basically managing the taxonomy and categorizing courses and occasionally writing code. And it's never like almost a fixed job, and you're kind of free to take whatever responsibility you want, and occasionally writing articles too when it fits. A majority of the team all write articles,
Yeah.
None of us are writers until this job have been paid to write, but all of us end up writing articles. And I think that tends to be one of the filters that you can sort of...
Yeah. I think what you're describing to me is so interesting because you didn't just say, hey, let's hire somebody who's been a contributor. I think that makes a lot of sense. And it wasn't just, let's just hire somebody for a particular set of skills for a job that we clearly have open right now. You hired someone who was working in a library who wound up taking these library adjacent skills in and say, wow, let's work at how we classify. Let's work on the taxonomy of all, because there's a ton of content on your site, isn't there?
It's growing. Yeah.
I love the gentle grimness where you're like, yeah, there's a lot. So finding talented people who genuinely care and want to contribute, and then finding spaces for them to sort of carve out their own piece of your project where they can be the most useful is a really, really, it's a shame, but I think this might be reasonably unusual to see in technology.
Yeah, I mean, it's also like I've actually not been successful whenever I put a job post.
Oh, can you talk about this a little bit?
It's just, I really don't know how to interview people, right? If you just send a random resume or like I went through 100 job interviews before I got one job and none of the processes felt fair to me.
Oh.
So
yeah, no.
I didn't want to put other people through it. I just didn't know how to judge people based on skills purely, Like I rather work on like if there is an overlap between sort of our interests and if they have some way of contributing, let's start with that and maybe expand the role from there. People generally come as part-time or just like volunteer contributions. So this person started at volunteering, none of us had money back then. So I was technically a volunteer too. So it helped me with that strategy. There was another person who helped out and now has become even like, he was more senior, but just not in the online. He hadn't worked in the online education space, but wanted to switch over. So now he's a VP at an online education company,
Oh, wow, cool.
VP of business. So what I always found out is like, if you give the first opportunity, someone, they eventually end up contributing, and staying in the space.
And that's something you're pretty okay with, where you're like, hey, as an employer, as somebody working on this project I'm passionate about, I understand that people won't be with me for the rest of their lives. It's okay when they go.
Yeah, I think it's fine with us. I mean, I don't think we need to be a cult.
This is very unusual for a startup, isn't it? Whereas you're like, yeah, we hire complete people, not a skill set, and we don't want to be a cult. Can we make you the founder of more stuff? I guess my follow-up question is going to be about cloning you, so...
I mean, it also works in a specific sort of market. If this market was really, when I started Class Central, there were like 25, 30 competitors. Now there's no active competitor.
I'm going to assume this was your hard work, that you haven't been out poisoning other founders.
I didn't need to, I think. So that turned out really well. So I think the space also, like B2C is kind of hard.
MOOCs are a little bit hard right now, yeah.
Yeah, so and for someone who isn't teaching MOOCs directly, so it's even harder. So given the space we are in, we can move slower. We don't have to go and move really fast and build. There's no feature that I think we can build and it will be the next big thing. It's just a grind.
Yeah.
It's just building community, building your brand.
And do you know what? I know that this is going to be slightly controversial because there's so many founders with this bright new idea, and there's so many startups who say really the opposite of what you say. Like, hey, we just need 3 more months of crunch time, and then we'll have this one new feature, and that'll turn everything around. There's a lot of really focused hype out there, and it's so refreshing to hear like, yeah, I think what we're delivering is this knowledge, is this work in this space, and is this community. I don't think that having a glittery share to Facebook button is going to radically change that.
Yeah, I mean, I did believe this for a while, for the first few years,
Oh.
Because that's all you know, right? Because
that's how the industry feels like it works.
If you read only TechCrunch and if you're like into technology, you basically have I think now the movement is much stronger around other kinds of businesses, but this was just the iPhone had just come out and we were at the beginning of the mobile explosion. And everything needed to be an app. And I think so you felt that. I went through it and I was very unhappy because I was trying to match expectations that somebody else set for you, some external expectation. And I do feel that even certain companies, they make decisions based on what kind of company they want to be, how big they want to be, rather than based on what their users need or something.
Yeah.
And then it always becomes for us, like whenever I did it, first of all, it didn't work. And second, it made me unhappy. So now it's easy to talk now, but after years of this journey, that's when I realized it wasn't something I realized very early on. It took me a few years to get to this point.
And I think this is really interesting. I think that when you have a conversation with someone, it's tempting to assume that this is who they've been. I think I had just sort of assumed you had magically been this preternaturally mature, exceedingly calm founder your whole life, or your whole professional life in this project. I think that you sort of hinting at this growth, you talking directly about this growth that you took is really exciting. So you said that sort of moving past hype-filled media, if that's fair, like the become a unicorn, get big, do the thing, that was a part of your journey.
Yeah, I did. I mean, it's probably the reason I was able to work full time on it. So I did go through an incubator.
Okay.
2 years. Yeah. So for the first 2 years, it was a side project. Then I went through an incubator, and they gave me 100K. Which I paid it to my lawyers to help me with the visa.
Oh gosh, like visas automatically complicate everything.
And that also added, so the complications, and that also meant that you had to sort of hit certain targets so that it makes it easier to apply for a visa and all that.
Yeah.
So definitely when you go through that program, like you had no awareness, like, when you think you need to apply to an incubator.
Okay.
And you follow that path and you go through it, and you see like it's built around raising money. And you want to raise money, but you don't really know why. But you kind of come up with a script.
Everyone else is raising money.
Yes. I mean, now I realize the reason I wanted to raise money is because I didn't know how to make money, or like.
I think that's really common though, isn't it?
Probably it is, I think. Yeah, I think some companies do need to raise money, but I don't think a lot, not everyone needs to raise money. Or sometimes it's just like a small amount early on can help you.
Visa money, like it sounds like it didn't hurt.
Yeah, it didn't hurt. I mean, it hurt for a few years just being unhappy, but generally, yeah. I mean, I remember there was a period when I used to just wake up with like a knot in my stomach, and I got so used to it. But it's just, I realized it was just because of the external expectation. It wasn't like I was unhappy with how the site was doing, or I was just not unhappy how it should be doing.
Was this after you moved to the Bay Area?
So I did start because I was unhappy with my first job. That's the reason I kind of created this side project.
Okay.
I was looking to move into the Bay Area. So I worked in Dallas, and I couldn't clear technical interviews. So that's why I was taking these courses.
Yeah.
And then eventually I took one course and I was able to find a job in the Bay Area. I was weak at data structures and algorithms. So I did take a Coursera course on data structures and algorithms, and finally helped me clear a technical interview.
Oh, do you remember what the course was called? Or maybe even if it's still running?
No, it's still running. They changed the name, but it's from a professor at Stanford called Tim Roughgarden. It's 4-course series. I forget because they changed the name. When I did it, it was called Design and Analysis for Algorithms Part 1.
You've given us enough search terms where you can find it if we really need.
Yeah.
I was kind of secretly hoping we could touch on like what our favorite MOOCs out there are. So, woo.
Yeah, once I came here, everything is not a side project. Everything is a startup. So you start thinking about starting a company.
Very hustle mindset.
Yeah, the first 2, sort of 1 year or year and a half was just a side project in my head. So I was just experimenting with stuff. It's just like, launching a Google Plus page, then eventually launching a blog. And I didn't really care if it worked or not.
I mean, you cared a little.
You cared, but it's like you didn't get, or you're not looking at numbers and seeing, you don't have great targets,
Yeah.
So you don't notice if it doesn't work. If it works, you notice it, but you don't really notice if it doesn't work. Because I felt that immediately after I went full-time. So my thesis was, if I'm doing this part-time, I'm getting this much result. If I just put more time in it, once I go full-time, I'll get a lot better results. And that really didn't happen. Suddenly, when I started tracking the results, it didn't happen.
Yeah. That's really exciting. This is kind of abstractly encouraging. So, hey, our dear listener, if you got a weird idea or a side project, go ahead and launch it, but don't necessarily measure everything. Like, if you want to keep the stakes artificially low.
Yeah, I mean, and sometimes it just takes. I just don't think the business we are in was a business until like 2.5 years ago. If MOOCs didn't make money, we won't make money. We are always a subset of a bigger industry. And if that industry for the first few years was just focused on user growth, not really monetization, and they used to get free press and free.
The MOOC boom. Yeah.
Yeah, so they got a lot of user growth organically, so they didn't really have to do anything. But then as the space evolved and the opportunities to monetize also evolved.
Let's shift for just a couple minutes and sort of talk about MOOCs more generally. So you've talked about how they were immediately useful for you, that you had kind of a sucky time. Well, it's actually a decidedly sucky time in interview processes and getting a job and technical screens, which I think is going to be something that feels really familiar to anybody who's ever gone for a junior role in technology. And that you specifically leveraged learning from these online courses, and specifically this Coursera one from Stanford, and that this is what worked.
Basically, I did my undergrad in electronics and telecommunication in India, and then I switched to masters in computer science at Georgia Tech.
Oh, great school. I'm a bit jealous.
I mean, sometimes I'm jealous of myself too. I don't know how I got into it, but if I'd known how good it was, I would not have applied.
Although our dear listeners should absolutely apply for anything they want to do.
Yeah, I mean, that's something, but it's like I didn't apply to Stanford or Harvard or MIT. I like self-selected myself out, just because it seems so big when you are not being associated with bigger brands.
Yeah.
And, one of the things that I had an advantage at because I went through Georgia Tech, it's just like the getting an interview was easier, but clearing was still difficult because, again, they asked you questions around data structures, algorithms, which I didn't have a good base in. And I tried doing interview preparation, technical interview questions, and which basically meant that I was memorizing it. I really didn't understand it. So if you twisted the question a bit, I would not be able to answer. So that's why doing a Stanford Introduction to Data Science sort of first year course helped me get my base strong, and that helped me clear my first technical interview.
Yeah. So it sounds like this was an incredibly useful way for you to engage with MOOCs. Say, hey, I'm doing this for a very specific reason. Are there any other specific courses or specific anything where you're like, hey, I've done this or I've heard from a lot of people and this absolutely rocks. Maybe your listeners should check this out.
I think Learning How to Learn on Coursera from
Barbara
Oakley.
I was going to mention that. That's my favorite.
That's my favorite too. And it actually helped me with my sort of Class Central career too. Just because until that point, I didn't know how to sort of manage my time. I would code for a couple of weeks and I would stop replying to emails.
Oh, that's relatable.
Then I would do marketing and emails in a couple of weeks. So you generally need to do everything every week to move the business forward. And the tips and tricks that she taught in the course helped me sort of allow me to do different tasks on the same day that were not related to each other.
Yeah. So for me, I'm absolutely a huge fan of Barbara Oakley's Learning How to Learn on the Coursera platform. For me, the thing I took away and think about a lot was she talked about how people who make incredible industry-changing breakthroughs in different disciplines tend to either be very young or tend to be career changers. So folks who are new enough to the field where they can ask what feels like silly questions and challenge established structures. Why is it this way? Why can't we do it this way? What if we? And as somebody who changed careers into tech, I found that very exciting.
Yeah, it is. She has a very positive message and you're convinced. Sometimes other people have positive message, but you're not convinced. And she's also very scientifically minded. She shows research and it's not just she's a personal friend too. So that is one of the perks.
Oh gosh, I'm so jealous.
Yeah. I mean, it's something these are the other things that I got out of Class Central that kept me going, even when I wasn't happy, So,
yeah.
And helped me solidify this approach that I have right now. Actually, many of the people who work at Class Central are have done the course and came through Barbara Oakley or.
Yeah.
So she's a good lead generation for future hires for us.
I'd say a good lead generation for learning in general. I think my former coworkers would fuss at me if I didn't mention that another course I'm a really big fan of is actually a FutureLearn course from the Open University. So I really love their Introduction to Cybersecurity course.
Yeah, I've not taken this. I should.
It's really, like, they seem to keep updating it, so it's really, really good. And it's got...
I'll
I was going to say, it's got that chap who does the intro, and that's not very helpful. It's got an internet celebrity whose name escapes me who does the intro, so it's also quite fun.
I wonder if we did an interview with this person. We used to interview professors before.
What? See, okay, so the lessons we've really got from what you've done are side projects don't have to be high stakes. You can walk away from the hype if you want to for your startup and company. Hiring folks you might not expect to can be really valuable. But also, doing side projects, or in my lucky case, doing a podcast, can give you polite excuses to chat to your heroes.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically how I met Barbara Oakley, you know? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I have definitely leveraged the site as our interviews as an excuse to talk to people, you know, or like get to know people.
Yeah. This has been so useful and so informative. Is there any sort of takeaway advice on hiring, on MOOCs, on really anything that you'd want to leave our listeners with?
I still consider it as an experiment, you know.
Oh, wow.
The hiring strategy, and you know, like we'll see how it goes in the next couple of years. This is the first year that we have sort of expanded the team.
Yeah.
And usually end up with people who, you know, sort of just email me or something like that. So we'll see how it goes and how it works out in the long term.
So I think that's another interesting lesson. Like, if you want the job, even if you don't see it, you should probably get in touch with people. My apologies for all the emails you're about to get.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, and sometimes it's like few months. I have a document when I talked to the person the first time and when we actually started working, you know, like, and sometimes it's like years or months between that period. So it's always good to get the conversation going, and when the timing aligns, maybe, you know.
Yeah. This has been so impossibly interesting. Thank you so much for joining us. If folks wanted to find out more about Class Central or to see what you do online, where can they find the site and where can they find you?
I'm on all social, like except Facebook. I'm on Twitter or LinkedIn, and that's probably the best place to reach out to me. Or just email me at my first name @classcentral.com.
And I think we could check out Class Central at classcentral.com as well.
Yes, we just removed the hyphen this year. So
very exciting.
Yeah, people used to call it Class-Central. So now no ambiguity.
Thank you again for joining us.
No, it was my pleasure.
And thank you very much for listening.